Welcome everyone to yet another episode of the Bobo and Flex Show. My name is Bobo and I'm your host, and I'm with the beautiful Flex, also known as Flex Mommy on the internet. Today we're bringing you a juicy conversation about race. We're going to be discussing how race affects us as two Black women living across the world, how race affects everyone, cultural appropriation, how race intersects with beauty, fetishization, all of the things. So, Flex,
Yes.
What is your relationship with your Blackness today? How has it evolved over time? It's a broad question intentionally.
My relationship to my Blackness is good. I'm actively trying to reclaim it after years of neglecting it. I used to be, when I was younger, I spent a lot of, I personally, but my mum made sure I spent a lot of considered time in Africa, learning what it was to be African, Ghanaian, speaking our language, wearing clothes, eating food, all of that shit. And then I got to like 15, 16, and then I realized that the rest of the world was finally ready to tell me that I wasn't Australian. And I was like, well, what the fuck is this? So I spent the next like 5 years actively repelling anything to do with Blackness in hopes that people would stop associating negative connotations of Blackness with me. But I wasn't nuanced enough to realize that I could like denounce those negative stereotypes and not denounce Blackness as a whole. Now I'm good with it. And now I'm just kind of like, I'm quite happy for people to embrace me as such. Yeah. Because it's better than the alternative.
Well, do you think there was a moment
which is being a whitewashed
you
Black
realized
person
that you're Black?
Yeah, I always told this story. It was like when it was like I was in year 10, so it would have been like 15, 16. And it was around the same time when I started hanging out with people outside of my own high school. So hanging out with a lot of like white people from the other affluent suburbs of the area we were in. And for them, I was like one of the only minorities they knew, if not the only. And I'm not talking like people of color generally. I'm not talking like your Greeks, your Italians. I'm talking like your like outward ethnic people. Like I've never met one like you. So I realized at the start, my Blackness was referenced quite a bit, and my Blackness in relation to being othered was mentioned quite a bit. And this idea that I had to prove that I was Australian was also a hot topic. Could you imagine? I was like, my family's been here longer than your family, bitch. Like, you came here 3 years ago, Polish man. But yeah, so I remember it was like 15, 16, and we had this thing in Australia called Harmony Day or Multicultural Day where you acknowledge the cultural differences. Is it one day a year where you're allowed to just like be fully your culture and it's okay? Screaming. But anyway, the children in the school were encouraged, like, wear your cultural garb, bring some cultural food and share with the world. Now you've got to imagine, even though I was from another culture, I just assumed that was like my household. That was like how I was raised. I didn't know that other people didn't go home and speak a different language or eat different food. I thought we were all doing that shit. So it didn't occur to me that I was of a different culture. So then I remember one of my teachers was like, oh, what are you going to wear? And I was like, oh, I just got these really great disco pants from American Apparel. So I want to wear those. And she was like, no, like you should wear something from like where you're from. And I was like, huh? I don't really get it. And she was like, no, like you should like, it's fun. It's like the one day of the year to like really represent your culture. You should wear something from where you're from. And I was like, I don't really get it. Like, what do you want me to wear? And so like, yeah, when I wore like cultural wear, it was like at a wedding, at a funeral, not just like out and about, And I was like, why would I wear my funeral clothes to school? And she was like, no, like just, like really embrace where you're from. So I went home. And I was like, Mom, what do you think she meant by this? And she was like, oh, like, because you're Black, she wants you to wear like, oh, no, come, you can wear something of mine. I'm like, well, I don't want to wear something of yours. I want to wear my clothes. And it was this whole thing where I just wore what I wanted to wear that day. But then the whole day, teachers being like, oh, so disappointed you didn't choose to wear something from your culture.
Oh, my God.
Oh, that's a shame. Did you bring any of that delicious African food? I was like, what is going on? And it was that day in mixed with stuff like
Wow.
people just making comments about my hair looking like a sheep when I wear it naturally. People asking if I could twerk. Like all these different things of like otherness was like, oh my God, like I'm really not the same with these people. And then I started to acknowledge it when my brothers would say shit like, oh, you know, I had a racist experience or so and so. I remember one time my brother was telling me that like he had experienced something racist, and I was just like, maybe they didn't like your personality. Why was it about your skin color?
You were that person.
Like that's how in deep I was.
Wow.
Like when I was like 15 talking about maybe it's about your personality.
Oh my God. Just thank God
Plot
you didn't
twist.
back then. Listen.
Oh my goodness. Like look, I'm now that's why I think I'm like looking out for all my assimilated, whitewashed Africans talking about like, no, we don't need to do that anymore.
Wow.
Like, be comfortable, speak how you want to, dress how you want to. Like, no, we have to revolt. So yeah, that's when I realized my race mattered. And ever since then, I was like, fuck, this is fucked up. Because prior to that, because I lived in like an affluent suburb and like went to an okay school or whatever, it was a public school, but it was like in a good district. Yeah. I had the privilege of saying that I was from the eastern suburbs. No, I wasn't from the west. No, gross. It's from the east. It was nice. And so that contrast with now being perceived as other, I was like, well, what do you mean? I had all this privilege and now I don't. But you know, when did you realize your race mattered? Because you have such a different upbringing.
Yeah, I was a lot younger than you. I'm shocked that was in grade 10 for you. By grade 10, I was a fully fledged Negro. For me, it was in grade 2. Well, was that grade 2 or grade 3? One of the two. I had just moved to Belgium, so I was at this British school, and obviously the only Black person. And I had a crush on this boy. His name is Sebastian. And we were all playing tag. And it's such a tragic story. And he was just like, ew, Black people are gross and dirty. I don't want to play with you. Just some shit like that. And I was just like, oh shit. Like I literally had an epiphany. And in that moment, I was like, oh my God, like I'm not like these hoes. Like, we're not the same. And I'm on the wrong side of the tracks. Yeah, I'm not white. Like, I'm not one of the good ones. But let's jump into some controversy. Are you racist? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Yeah, why do you think you're racist?
Nah, I don't know. You know what? Am I racist? Let me think about it.
So I was arguing with my boyfriend the other day, as I do. And he was telling me that Black people can be racist. Because I was like, no, we can't be racist though. And he was like, no, anyone can be racist. Like all of this like Twitter activism shit is trash. Like Black people can be racist. If you discriminate against someone because of their race, it's racist. And so, of course, we argued about, like, racial dynamics and, like, racial hierarchies and societal racism and white supremacy and institutional racism. And he stood by his words. So I want to know, like, you being a Black person in a predominantly white country.
I'm definitely prejudiced. I'd say I'm prejudiced, but I'm not racist.
Okay, why do you differentiate?
Well, because if I'm going to judge someone on their race, it's not their race as like an insular thing. It's my experience with that person.
What do you mean?
Well, so let's say I'm not going to say like I'm not going to say all Black people are so-and-so. I'm going to say my experience with that group of Black people in this particular experience has been this. That's insular. Okay. But if I'm going to mention their race, it's prejudice because I'm centering their race. You know what I mean? But generally, no. I feel like if I had remained a fucking assimilated as fuck, whitewashed Black person, definitely would have become racist.
Towards Black people?
Because to anyone.
Ooh.
I feel like as I, on the journey of reclaiming my Blackness, I started to see how I wasn't the only marginalized person. And I could talk to an Asian person and they could be like, oh yeah, no, I had the same experience. Yeah. Or an Indigenous person, oh, I have the same experience. You know, you begin to feel more of an empathy and a community and a like-mindedness with other people of color I'm talking visible people
Right.
of color, not like I appear white, not like white passing people of color. Sorry, like it's not the same.
We're gonna get into
but
that.
had I not, I feel like, yeah, it would have been way easier to be like a full blown racist.
Oh wow.
Because if you can imagine, if I from like pre-14, I thought I was part of the like plain privileged. You know what I mean? Because I was looking at how I was perceived based on where I was living.
Yeah, it was a class thing.
Oh, like you live in a house, like not an apartment. Oh, like your family has more than one car. Like you have a phone, you're only 10. Like things like that gave me perceived privilege and actual privilege. So had that have been my lived reality for the duration of my life, it would have been like, fuck all these hoes. Like
oh my god, that's so interesting. Well, were you classist or like were you racist? I think sometimes we confuse the two.
It's hard to be classist in a public high school. Like I feel like how classist can you really be?
Yeah, you can be like, fuck those poor people.
But I think it was like it's how I think about like the patriarchy, right? How the patriarchy centers men and doesn't think about women. They're not out here trying to like
oppressing.
Well, some of them are, but they're not like their main goal isn't to fuck with women, it's to elevate men. In my head, my main goal was just to worry about me. So I was thinking about me in contrast to other people, but not in spite of them, just like, you know, I had a phone first, therefore I'm better. But not because I was classist to a whole group of people based on their race. It was individual.
Okay, I see.
Like I was individually, you know, judging people. Prejudice.
Okay, I see what you mean. But you've never like you don't have any biases towards any one demographic, like any one race as a whole.
Not as a whole, no. I've had too many separate experiences to be in a position to class everybody as one. That's just, how have you not met enough people of a certain demographic to realize they're not the same? But again, it's one of those things where I'm more conscious of centering the Black experience or the ethnic experience than the other, because I don't know the other experience.
Yeah, so you can't.
But I guess that is a prejudice, that is a bias, that is favoritism. And that's why when we get to this whole idea of like whiteness and how I don't like when people are always coming for white people in a bad way, so it's really hard to understand a lived experience outside of your own. This is what I was saying in the last episode, Yeah. So yeah, but like I don't really think people are unfairly coming for white people. That's not what I'm saying. But I can see why the journey to understanding is difficult, because it is difficult to get it. Like I don't understand the lived experience of you know, a Southeast Asian, or like a disabled person, second generation person, or a disabled person, or a trans person. But I understand discrimination, so that empathy bleeds on into all the marginalized communities.
So the same energy that I have for like disabled people, which is honestly like little. I wish it wasn't, but hey, it is. I project that onto white people as well, except maybe the difference is that white people actually have to engage with Black people more than I ever have to engage with someone who's not able-bodied. But I just think that like I don't go about my day thinking of ways to make the world more accessible because it doesn't affect me. And so I don't expect that same energy from white people, which is why I think the conversation about race at some point needs to be replaced with the conversation about climate change. Because no one has added anything new and compelling to the conversation about race since like 2008. True. So let's end climate change. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but I think like coming together to end climate change would require a unity that doesn't exist.
The tea. So, I think actually global warming will end racism because that is the only thing.
We'll all go.
I want to also talk about who gets to be Black. Because I think like it's layered. Do white people who are African, do you get to be African? People who are mixed race, like if you're half Black and half white or half Black, half Asian, like what even is blackness?
Blackness is not like whiteness. Whiteness
is invisible.
Universal. Blackness, nuanced. Exactly. So, I mean, I don't think it's a one size fits all. I think if you can justify your access to the cultural thing, be free. Like, I don't really care to tell a white African that they can't wear braids. It's as much of your culture as it is mine. Like, can my albino cousins not wear braids so they're not visibly black?
Right,
no. Like, it's not about the shade of your skin. not like that's not a good way to put it. It's not about just the shade of your skin. It's about your ethnicity. But also and your lived experience, and also to understand the lived experiences around you. Like an albino African person can justify why they have a cultural tie to braids that a Caucasian European cannot. But then, like, but again, I know it's like, but the Vikings, but the Swedish people, like, I don't give a shit. Wear your braids. I don't care. But also, don't come to me as like some sort of ally talking about, I'm like some person said to me, how can I wear braids as like a person who's aware of their privilege? Listen to your question, babes. Like, listen, it's all there. And also, we'll get to it, but it's kind of like, stop relying on people to form your thoughts for you. Yeah, like, if you feel as though it is your right and it's your comfort, then be free.
So is Rachel Dolezal, is she black?
Not to be black. No. To appropriate, to appreciate, to insult, to affirm, to praise. That is all your right. Like, even if I said to you, every braids appropriation, edges appropriation, even if I said it, you would still choose to behave otherwise, because who are you and who am I? You don't care what I think, really. You want to be validated for being a good ally, and I can't do that for everyone. Not even I'm a good ally. I'm like such a shit ally to so many communities I need to do better for. Like, I can't make you feel better about not doing better. Next. Oh, but also, before we jump on, I just want to touch on the difference between cultural appropriation, assimilation, and appreciation, because they're very nuanced and different. So very quickly, cultural appropriation is when you take something, or when you use something from someone else's, or when you plagiarize, essentially, a culture that is not your own. Cultural appreciation is when you acknowledge the cultural significance of this thing and you wear it with pride. You know, assimilation is trading out your own culture for somebody else's. Yeah. Or your own whatever. So, like, cultural assimilation might be the fact that I choose to wear wigs instead of my natural hair. Not only because of, like, protecting my the aesthetic, but also because it's just easier to, like, snake into these spaces when I'm not, what's the word I'm looking for?
Afrocentric. When
I'm not presenting as someone who's, like, extremely Afrocentric. It's just easier.
That's real. Do you ever think we'll reach a point in time where we're not possessive of our ethnicities or cultures? Or is that is just too far?
Not until everybody has a clear understanding of what is happening. So I think the frustration with the conversations around culture or appropriation is that everybody thinks it's just a black problem. It's just an Asian problem. It's just an Indian problem. It's just a whatever. And it's like, no, that's not what it's saying. And everyone's talking about the, like, braids or the conversation on appropriation is just a symptom of racism. Right. Like, that's what we're talking about. It's like, it's not even about whether you wear the braids or the sari or whatever. That's secondary.
The disease
to the fact that
caused that symptom.
We live in it's like we're talking about greater racism. So we can't even acknowledge the actual root cause. Like, we still have people saying that they're like not prejudiced, not racist, not this, not that. Like, we can't have these greater discussions if we don't understand the root of why we're having them to begin with. But the reason why appropriation exists is because I'm going to say white people, or not even white people, people with no ties to culture.
Okay, why are you dragging?
You can be any person. So not even white people, just people with no ties to culture. Because you don't understand what cultural significance is generally at the core of you, it's hard to acknowledge the damage you're doing when you take from a culture that is not yours and you get rewarded for that.
But that's why I was saying there is no use in us telling Kendall Jenner to stop wearing cornrows. She literally doesn't have the range. Like, she doesn't have the intellectual range, the experiential range to understand what it's like to be attached to a culture. Like, so for us to be like, Kendall, that what you're doing is offensive. Not only does she not care because she's self-serving and like she doesn't think beyond what will this do for me, she also cannot understand just the bare minimum of what is culture. Like, what? My unpopular opinion about cultural appropriation is that it will never be solved because too many people don't have culture to begin with, so they'll never understand cultural appropriation. I think, in the grand scheme of not only like social issues but also race, it's very banal. Like, it's not like, so once white people are not appropriating our culture, like, then what? Like, what have we achieved?
There's always more, though. I mean, the reason why I don't think it's a conversation we should stop is because people of color don't get to choose when race and conversation of culture don't affect them. It'll always be intrinsic. So, like, whether or not like we ever stop like white people, non-black people from appropriating, it doesn't matter because the fundamental fact is I will always be discriminated against because of my race, because of my culture,
Right.
because of those things. So I'm just sharing the discomfort. If I need to feel some kind of way by people calling me a fucking sheep when I wear my natural hair, then you'll feel some kind of way when you wear braids. I'm just trading it out. Like, I'm only being fair. Let's say we can't teach everybody how to understand let's say we can't teach everyone how to be critically minded, how to think critically, how to develop themselves. Does that mean we stop talking about it? It's like, no, like we still talk our shit. We still lead by example because eventually it'll instruct change of some point. We might not get to cultural appropriation being fixed, but there might be a greater discussion about how culture intersects with our day to day. And so maybe from then that'll encourage a less brazen.
So it's about intent.
It is. Well, no, it's about impact.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter about my intent.
Well, I think...
Because, like, I don't talk about cultural appropriation so hoes stop wearing braids. I talk about it so they understand that, by nature, these basic little things you think you do that have no impact have a huge impact.
I guess, fundamentally, what I was asking is the pursuit of ending racism even worthwhile? Like, is it worth our time? As Black people, is it worth the emotional labor? Is it worth the time? Is it worth the very little like return on investment that we're getting? Because I don't think we ever will get. But maybe I'm also just like really cynical.
How are you going to be such an idealist talking about everybody's inherently good, but should we bother ending racism? We don't have the range to guide that decision. It's about resource, education, assets, and knowing. You know, like even if, you know, I can talk to a toddler all day about consent. And they might not understand it, but they'll know not to snatch some shit from another bitch the next time they go to the park. You know what I mean? It's like you may not fundamentally understand it, but your actions will change and they will be better. So I'm going to still be talking about this shit. I'm going to still be making people feel uncomfortable because it needs to happen. If people who don't have my lived experience could feel a fraction of what I did growing up just from existing, like, I'm going to make that happen. I'm a spiteful ass bitch. Like, I'm not about like, I went through it so you don't have to. No, I went through it and now we're going to talk about it.
What I'm saying is I think the benefit of talking about race is for us as people of color to vent. I think it's really good, like therapeutic and cathartic, which is why I say like intention is important to consider when we're like discussing race. Because if I think we're going in like, I need to tell every white person who tests me, I just think that's not a good way of resourcing our energies and intelligence, because I don't think like that's ultimately consequential. Well, I think the fundamental issue is that this goes back to our spirituality episode. I think the fundamental issue is that we still don't believe, or we've deluded ourselves into thinking that we're separate from each other. So like all other issues stem from that. So I think like it's good to go with that knowledge and intention when we start like trying to tackle the race thing.
But I think like when the majority of the world doesn't even identify as spiritual, we can't even get to the topic of we're all one, we're all the same, because that'll never be a reality for the majority of the world. Like they will never see that perspective.
See, that's how I feel.
So it's like use the tools we have.
I agree with
we all
you.
Different. We all like we're all gonna be discriminated against. Let's share that narrative so they all know. Because I'm not trying to end racism. I'm trying to govern how people engage with me. That's two separate things. Like, I don't care.
Yeah.
Like, do whatever you want in private. But when you're around me, you will not say the N-word if you're not a black person. You're not going to fuck around and try and do this Ebonic shit. Don't use these black emojis if you're not black. Like, all these things, I don't care what you do in your own time with other people. But for my quality of life, don't do them around me. And that's my right. You know what I mean? And if you can't fuck with it, then fuck off. Like, it's simple.
I'm with that. Speaking of like that type of responsibility, do you think like white people are responsible for what their ancestors did to us?
No.
Why
I mean
not?
Responsible. Like, what do you mean by that?
Let's talk about reparations. Like, reparations is an example. So when the conversation of like, let's get our land back, especially like in South Africa, the conversation of like, let's get our land back, the response is always, no, it's my great-great-grandparents who took your land. I'm not responsible, fam. That's not on me.
Right.
Like, to what extent are white people responsible for what their ancestors did to us? Do you know what I mean? I feel like that's a conversation we've been avoiding for too long.
I think that like it's not a universal conversation because there's the South African leg, there's the Indigenous conversation happening right now in Australia.
And we're still like
we're not even ready for that
wound
discussion
is
yet
still
because
fresh.
we can't even get by whether or not people can wear braids or not. Like nobody's giving land back to anyone. Like you know what I mean? If a basic educated person can't talk about whether or not I can wear this or do this, then nobody's giving back land. Like we're not like seriously though, Bobo. Like people don't have the range to have these discussions. It's so idealistic, and for me, I think the average person is a dummy. I'm sure the average person doesn't even know what reparations is, let alone whether that will be like
I guess like we're seeing it I now see like where we're diverging. We're seeing it like in the same way, but just opposite.
Yeah.
So
I'm seeing in a micro. You're seeing macro.
Yeah, so I'm thinking people are way too dumb to understand cultural appropriation. Let's start with reparations.
Which is crazy to me. And I'm saying people are too dumb to understand reparations. Let's start small with appropriation.
No, but I think both of these conversations have to do with fundamental responsibility. I think it's really hard for a white person to see how like a hairstyle can like inform like oppression and like culture and how privilege intersects with all of that. But I think land is so tangible and three-dimensional that it's like if we start with like a literal, like you can see how this action has impacted these people in this way, let's fix it now. I feel like that's a really good starting point to like, let's fix how we treat human beings like that are.
But I also think with that argument, right, like can we be blamed for what our ancestors have done, right? So people are saying I don't want to be blamed for like what my ancestors have done, so giving land back won't seem like a big radical act because it's so far removed from their lived experience. But the reason why the conversation is so difficult now, because everyone's like, well, why do I need to change? Why me? And it's like, well, let's start with you, because if you can't acknowledge why your ancestors need to do something different, then you can, like I don't think giving like, not generally, but I think the symbolic act of giving land back would be really impactful for people of color and Indigenous people, but not for white people. Like then I don't think the average white person is going to feel like, oh my God, finally, like the burden is off me. No.
I do think white people struggle with a lot of white guilt. And I think a lot of them, they feel like guilty because of what their ancestors did. Or they're just walking on eggshells because they're scared they're about to like offend someone or like do some wild shit that's gonna make them a racist. Because ultimately, a lot of people are more scared of being called a racist than of actually being racist. And like that also informs a lot of like white guilt. So I think one of the very first steps that we need to take into account when we're like dealing with racism is how do we deal with like the monster of like white guilt? Because I think it's a barrier to understanding.
I don't know. I don't think the average white person is facing white guilt, only because of the example you made before of like,
Really?
yeah, just think of the example you made
Yeah.
before about how you, like, let's say you are not thinking about how to make life more, how to make roads or life more accessible for disabled people because it's not your lived experience. Like you don't feel guilty for that,
Yeah.
Bobo. Like you don't fundamentally.
I don't, but I didn't cause
Exa-
that. Whereas white people know that they've
But
done
it's like
this.
benefiting from capitalism. You didn't cause it, but you still benefit from it. It's like that. Like you didn't cause the inaccessibility, but you directly
Yeah.
benefit from the accessibility. Therefore, do you really feel guilty? You don't. So I don't think the average white person or whoever's like, or descendants from colonizers' history don't feel
Yeah.
literally guilty. I think they feel fearful of being called out or like a bit ashamed of not being educated on it, so they can't defend themselves. But guilty, no.
Fuck, we need a white person on this show.
I think if
to
guilt
grill
is
them.
such a good motivator, and you know what guilt looks like. Like that's when we get white
Yeah.
saviors. Like when people have gone to those developing countries with a little speech, I'm going to save in. Like that's what white guilt is. Not somebody who's scared of getting called out for maybe wanting to wear, a kippah or a cheongsam. Like that's not the same thing. I don't know. I just think the conversation of white guilt is one that it's like one of those frequently misused terms because guilt by definition, because guilt by definition is like, hold on, because like when I went on Psychology Today, I was like, this is not the guilt that people think they're feeling. Hold on. So guilt is the fact of having committed or a specified implied offense or crime, like misconduct, like that's liability. That's not what people are feeling right now. Like you're feeling a little bit bad. I don't think guilt is like what's happening or what's popping through. As I can say,
really?
Like literally, like do you actually think about all the other marginalized communities outside of your own, Bobo, and tell me if you really feel guilty for having privileges they don't. It doesn't come in.
Yeah, but I think that's a false equivalency. As like the way that like white people have to engage us every day, like the way
white
that
people
they
don't have to
benefit from
engage
our
us every
oppression
day.
all
That's
the
not
time.
true. White people do not have to engage black people every day.
They really do.
They do
not like
not.
Trump, but your average white person.
They do
I guess
not.
okay. This is
Think
also
about-
geographic. I don't think. Actually, I think we're both right because I don't think the average like white person in Paris, maybe not Paris,
anywhere,
the average white person in like Switzerland has any white guilt. But
legitimately, like if you have white guilt,
but South
like,
African whites,
proper white guilt is because of your proximity to blackness. Now, blackness is like quite like geographically homogenous generally, you know what I mean? Like a lot of black people in one black area. When you get people like me who exist in white spaces, the people around me aren't feeling guilty. They're looking at me as a privileged person and being like, well, she made it out okay.
Do you call your white friends out when they are out of line?
I don't talk to my white friends about race too much anymore. I don't like it.
Yeah, same.
I just don't think.
Well, I literally only have like 2 or 3 white friends.
I think it's like a bell curve. Like if you can imagine a hill, so it goes up and it comes down. As the hill goes up, it's like, oh, understanding. We're understanding. Oh, we're like breakthrough. And then it crashes and burns because they can't sort of contextualize it outside of this interaction. So you might be able to acknowledge how I might experience microaggressions, but not how an Indigenous person may experience that, or an Asian person might experience that, or a South American person might experience that. It's just really one-dimensional. And I also think it gets back to the point where it's like if I'm having a conversation with a white person about race, it's about them trying to prove they're an ally or trying to convince me they're not racist. It's like, I know, it's chill.
Wild,
like, you don't need to remind me. Like, go. And I feel like when generally white people need to talk to white people about racism. Like, talk to your peers.
I also
because
agree,
like,
because I'm not doing it.
Yeah, it's like, what can
I'm not doing
or
it.
talk to, like, there's this this Instagram I follow. Her name's Pickpocket Party, and this girl, and she's not black, and she's been speaking to her audience about microaggressions and white people can't say the N-word. And she was like, I've had this conversation for 2 days and I'm already exhausted. I do not understand how people don't understand why they cannot say these words or cannot behave in that way. And that's what I'm talking about. Like, it's up to non-black people, or like, it's up to people outside of the actual race to discuss racism or any of these things or conversations.
Because it also won't be received from us.
Exactly. Like, I can tell you all day why something's racist and it won't click until someone who's like-minded to you says it and you get it, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But it's also like this kind of like, what is it, like the mammy thing? Hold on, let me Google it so people get it.
The mammy thing.
I was reading this idea, like when people look to like black women especially to lead and guide them on conversations about race and racism, it's kind of like you want this person to be aggressive enough to make it hit, but also nurturing enough that you don't feel offended, but also intelligent enough that it's like they're smart enough to articulate it, but also like they've got to relate to me. Like all these things we need to be for you to get it, or you can just do your Googles and do it yourself. Like I'm still learning. I have to battle my own prejudices for other races, or other sexes or whatever it might be. Like that's constant work. I'm not going to men, how can I be a better ally to you? I'm just doing the work and making sure that I'm calling out everybody else so I'm not man bashing all the time. Like, why don't you do the same?
People just don't
just say you don't care and keep it pushing. Just say. It's this performative thing. Like, how do I be better for you? Like, it's not even about me, though.
Yeah.
Be better generally.
Yeah.
On the topic, though, I want to get back into this idea of, like, reverse racism and white privilege. Because I had a girl message me recently and said, I want to... She said... how did she word it? Something to the effect of, why are black people always telling us that we're privileged when we're not? Like, why do black people always think that...
I've already left the chat.
Why do black people always think that we have it better than them? It's really hard to be called racist. Bitch. So, and I want to be fair also, because I think the conversation about privilege is also really nuanced. And I think we need to talk about, like, whiteness versus white. Like, people who happen to be white and benefit from whiteness versus white supremacists. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because you're like, I'm not... So when we say you have white privilege, that's not a bad thing. I have black privilege. I have pretty privilege.
I'm not saying you're the part of the KKK.
Exactly. So I want to talk quickly and clarify what I mean by, or what everybody generally means by white privilege. So if you look at the history of the world, white people have always been in a position of power, influence, affluence. They've had resources, they've had assets, and they've had the ability to govern the world, essentially. Everywhere. Yeah. If it wasn't a place they genuinely came from, they would colonize it, take it, enslave the indigenous owners, and become, the top of the food chain. So historically, white people have always been on top or regarded as being on top, powerful, everything.
Right.
That manifests today as the idea that white people still have that privilege of being not the top of the food chain, not the best, but neutral. So when you look at a white person, you're always assuming not bad, but neutrality. So it's like...
Actually, not bad, but usually
good or neutral. So when you see a white person, you're not assuming... The stereotypes of whiteness aren't... The connotations or the stereotypes of whiteness aren't inherently bad. They're just neutral or good. That goes not just into people, but things. Like white, pure... White as the color. It's pure. It's clean. It's without filth. Just generally what people consider to be neutral or skin tone is of your complexion, white people. Yeah. Nude underwear, your complexion. Beige makeup, skin tone crayons, your complexion. So everything about whiteness, not about being white, but being like not about being like a white person, but the color, the context, everything about white is generally good. When you look at black, Black is seen as dark, evil, scary.
Yeah.
It's used to hide certain things. It's used that it's not a neutral generally. I'm not talking about fashion people where you wear it to look edgy or cool, but look at the way the connotation of black. If something is black, it's has got filth in it. It could be a bit dirty. You know, it's those connotations that have followed blackness everywhere. Nobody says blackness and thinks chill, light, happy, warm, chill.
Yeah.
It's always got a more negative connotation to the point where blackness is generally negative. Not good, not neutral, negative. So when we say you have white privilege, I'm not talking just white people. I'm talking people of light skin, people of proximity to whiteness. When you have white privilege...
Whiteness has an institution.
Exactly. Whiteness is invisible. You can't see the privilege you have because it's inherent. It's in your DNA.
It's also
people
the
look
equilibrium.
At you and assume the best. Nobody's looking at you and... It's exactly. So when you have white privilege, it's not saying that you yourself in your particular lived experience is privileged. I'm not saying that you are rich or you are educated. I'm just saying that in any situation you go to, you'll be held in higher regard than anybody else in the entire world because everybody sees themselves in you. There's a reason why white people feel the reason why whiteness has infiltrated all these other cultures, because generally whiteness has established itself as greater than or the top. So even if you want to shake that in any which way you can be the grubbiest bitch in the whole world, the most uneducated, and you will still benefit from white privilege because people are comfortable with whiteness. There is literally no place in the entire world where white people won't be regarded as better than.
Because someone tried to use the example of trying to justify why reverse racism exists. And they were like, okay, but if I, a white person, go to Ghana and the president of Ghana oppresses me, like he's racist towards me. And it's like, no. Still doesn't work that way because white supremacy still reigns supreme in a black space like Ghana. Like, it is literally pervasive.
Yeah.
Like, literally.
Colonized by the British,
you can go to any African country and any black person who's like, hey, you little cracker. Like, that, the gravitas of that versus a white person calling a black person nigger, it's just incomparable. It will always be a false equivalency.
Not the same.
Like, people love to try and deny the power dynamics that are inherent in racism. And it's like, no one can convince me that black people can be racist. Like, you just can't. There's no argument there. As a black person who can benefit from white supremacy, do you think you're complicit in perpetrating racism by continuing to benefit from whiteness?